Bulletin, who I started working for at the time of the last REF, they do quite a lot of this stuff, and you will probably be aware that they've worked with your university already, and with a lot of your departments. Particularly, I did the Winchester School of Art last REF with Jonathan Harris, one or the other. Anyway, so that's where we're coming from, and that is why I'm here today. Let's get a bit of an idea before we start of what it is that you want to get out of this course, because I think as we are quite a wide range, I've looked at your questionnaires, but perhaps you could just throw at me a couple of ideas of what it is that you actually want to get out of today. When you leave today, what you want to have, what skills? Anybody? You can say nothing, that's good, we'll go home now, because that's great. Done then, job done.
To have written or considered an effective policy brief.
Okay, to have written, yeah, okay, anybody else?
How to unpick key messages from long research papers.
Okay, so identifying key messages, or identifying, yeah, okay, we'll say key messages for now. Yeah, good, anybody else?
I said one earlier, which was differentiating between policy and practice.
Yep. Yes. Anyone?
Some of the key outlets or ways to publish these briefs, or just get the messages out.
Okay, hold on. Whee! Practice. Sorry, you said repeat, please?
The outlets or...
Ah, yes, of course. Yeah, gotcha. I was so busy trying to remember if it was a C or an S. But yes. Anybody else?
So who are the policymakers?
Ah, who are? Yes. Now, we are a really wide range, obviously. But who are the key policymakers? Okay. Anybody else?
I guess I'm thinking about my own research on one side, but I also teach a master's course in policy.
Oh.
I'm thinking of changing this as one of the assessment items to writing policy briefs.
Are you?
I'm thinking that I might get some ideas from you.
Yeah, well, or I might get some ideas from you. Okay, well, I mean, in many respects, pretty straightforward and pretty basic. I mean, I think this is what we'll be doing today. This is how I've sort of organized this course. So it's a relatively short workshop, and we are going to be concentrating on how to influence UK policy. So not really international policy, although there are areas which will work for you if you're looking at doing things in Turkey. We can talk about that a little bit later, or as we go along, it'll become more clear what those are. But influencing policy is obviously just one of a whole host of ways that you can create impact with your research. That said, many of the principles, a lot of what we will be talking about today with regards to structure, with regards to style, with regards to how you approach it, can be transferred to different areas. So if we're talking about any kind of public engagement. So even if at the end of today you think, you know what, I'm not really sure that this is the right thing for me. I'm not sure if MPs or policy groups or what have you are, there will still be something you can take away from this that will be applicable to you in your situation when it comes to how you present your research to the public or to it for public engagement. Yeah? Okay, so let me just move over here. I think what we want to start with next is one of these questions here, and that is, who is a policymaker? Okay, so I'm going to ask you. You're the experts in your area. Who are the policymakers? Anyone? Yes?
Specialist advisors in my field.
So,
Advise the ministers.
so specialist advisors, so basically SPADs, right? SPADs, special advisors, ministers, particularly if they're in cabinet, have special advisors, or a whole host of whom they depend upon. Sorry?
Civil servants.
Civil servants, yep. Anyone else? Who else is a policy maker? Who makes policy? We're missing the most basic one.
Politicians.
Exactly, politicians, MPs, politicians, anybody, councillors, MPs, anybody in a civic role like that. Anybody else? Okay, I'm just going to ask you to have a little bit of think about that a little bit wider. Who else directs policy or has a big influence on policy? Because
Pressure groups.
yes, pressure groups. Yep.
Sexual harassment.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, all of these. When we talk about policymakers, I think one of the things that's quite important to remember that while as policymakers obviously include government ministers, MPs, civil servants and local councils, what's equally important, and for some of you will be actually more important than those top ones there, are the policy community. So there's the pressure groups, charities, community organisations, trade unions, the media, anyone who can actually influence these people here. So these can be your allies. And like I said, depending on what your research area is, some of those people will be particularly, or representatives of some of those groups will be particularly useful for you. So when you're writing your policy brief, you have to remember, it's not just the top, it's also the bottom as well. Okay. Okay, so now that we know who they are, I think the next question has to be, what do policymakers want out of a written brief? And in order to figure that out, let's start by considering some general truths about this is what policymakers, the ones that I deal with, say. They tell me that they're very busy, they're not academic experts, they're keen to achieve something before the next election, they want to make a difference, they need to show that they're giving value, right? And they also tell me that they are constantly being bombarded with stuff. Not just policies, but all sorts of stuff. Letters from people who have different, all sorts of things. You need some paperwork, don't you? So, given what we know here about who they are, what would you say that means with regards to how you organize a policy brief? Or what kind of qualities should your policy brief have in order to answer these qualities? Or
Very lay language.
lay language, who said that? Yes, lay language, or basically everyday language, right? Yep, that's right. Because they're not academic experts, right? Anything else?
Supported by evidence.
Oh, sorry, I had two at the same time, one at a time.
Short and precise.
Short and precise. Yes, if you're very busy, short and precise, quite useful, isn't it? Anybody?
Supported by evidence.
Mm-hmm. Supported by evidence. Okay, we're going to consider this a little bit more later, because yes, absolutely. Supported by evidence, but I would argue that it's actually, funnily enough, not your first priority. In fact, on the list of priorities, it's kind of low down. But anyways, anybody else?
So put yourself in their shoes, like what they want out of it or what they need out of it.
Oh.
So targeting the audience.
Thank you. That is, and I have to tell you, that is the absolute fundamental of what do policymakers want. They want to know what's in it for me. Why? Why should I pay any attention to what you're saying? Now, how do you answer that question? Solutions to a problem, yeah, absolutely. So what you are doing and what policymakers are absolutely dependent upon researchers like yourselves for are potential solutions to problems, right? A lot of people who go into public service or even, so charities or what have you, will say that, they went there to make a difference, right? You can help them make a difference. You are there to help them, and they need you quite blatantly. And if you offer them something that allows them to do their job and to fulfill their ambition of making a difference, they will smile upon you. There's no doubt about that. They absolutely do need you. Okay, let's just look at what we've got up here. So, running through this again. So, a strong policy brief. Basically, as we said, policymakers are very busy people and they don't have time to read long documents. For the same reason, you want to structure it well and lay it out clearly. Policymakers very often will skim. But if you've got 20 things coming in at the beginning of the week, right? You're going to skim what's there. So what you are offering them has to be very clear and straightforward and on a plate, right? The language needs to be suitable for an educated, non-academic audience. So make it clear, accessible, free from unexplained jargon and obscure acronyms, but not dumbed down. It's quite a fine line there and quite a difficult thing to do. I used to work with Jenny Murray on Women's Hour at Radio 4. And one of the first things she told me in my first week at work was, when you are writing for radio, when you write a script, think of it as you are addressing your mother. So somebody that you respect her opinion, you want to impress her, you don't want to, but she might not be an expert in the area that you're expert in. So if when you're writing your policymaker and you're going through your language, it's very easy to slip into jargon. Think of it as you're writing it for your mother is reading it, or your best friend, or possibly your husband and wife, depending on whether or not you married in or out of your academic field. But you're writing it for somebody who's intelligent, but not necessarily expert as you are, right? Now, contrary to a lot of research papers, a policy brief needs to be front-loaded. You need to tell them right up front, for the same reason that we were talking about before, because people skim, because people read quickly, because often the way it needs to be front-loaded. You tell them on the first paragraph why it is that you are there and what it is you can do for them, right? And that's often done in the form of an executive summary. We'll come back to that later and have a bit of a run over that and how to do them. What we would generally do is, say that, well, we'll get to that later, so don't worry about it. But that's absolutely, that's kind of a key part of what we're talking about here. The purpose of a policy brief is to facilitate policy making. So it needs to show that there's something wrong with the current policy, and that means that there needs to be enough context to show why what you are saying is relevant. So we were talking here about supported by evidence. Yes, but don't go bananas on it, because if you go too crazy proving it, you've lost some of the things we were talking about earlier, the fact that people are skim. If you get bogged down in a case study, people will stop reading. Might be interesting, but if you're skimming, you don't do the case study. You don't read through it. Okay, what else have we got here? And following on from that, sorry, I'm just making a note from the question forms that came back. Okay, so following on from that, your policy brief needs to include a recommendation based on your research on what you think the policymaker needs to do or recommend. If you can't do that, if by the end of today, you don't know what it is that you are recommending a policymaker does, you have a slight problem. Because if you don't know what you want them to do, they're not going to know what to do. Again, you are the expert in this area, and they are looking for guidance from you. So you do really need to have a think and clearly define. We will do that today, don't worry about it, that's part of our workshop. But you need to have a think about what it is you want them to do. Which direction are you pointing them in? And they will not, on the whole, take the time to do it themselves because they're busy. The things we were talking about before. Any practical ideas you have on core recommendations and how they could be made to work are also important. So, for instance, if you've been working within the policy community or within certain key groups of beneficiaries, include that. This is how they can benefit. This is what you do. This is how they will benefit. And if you want to, some people like to do illustrations just because a picture is worth 1,000 words. I think you've been doing that in here quite a lot. Okay. So we'll go back to this. So remembering our key question. What's in it for me? What's in it for a policymaker? And again, I know I said it before, and I will say it again and again and again, this is absolutely key. And in the questionnaires that many of you asked, really how you could translate your research into something that will interest policymakers. That is absolutely the key. If you walk away with one thing, that is the thing you want to walk away with today. Answer that question. Policy brief, if you answer that question, very top of it, they're going to read on. And that's what your policy brief is about. Right? Every single paragraph, you want them to read more. Answer that at the beginning, they will read it. Stick it at the end, they might not get there. So what's in it for them? Okay. Now for the next part, I think what we're going to do is we're going to take 5 minutes to work through and identify and formulate the policy implications of your specific research. Can I just check and see, has everybody come in today with research that they want to focus on, that they want to develop a policy brief out of? Has anybody not got that? Okay, no. Is there somebody that you can work with here, somebody from either from your department or somebody sitting beside you, somebody who you like? You know, who you can basically, well, you can't work, yeah, great. So work together with somebody else to help. I mean, we'll come through and we will talk about your ideas and we will brainstorm a little bit later. But what I'd like you to do now is to take that form that I handed out earlier, one that is policy briefs, policy implications of your research. And thinking about your research, thinking about the things that we talked about before, and particularly that, what should we call it, just the multi-million-pound question. Consider these things here. And take about 5 minutes. Actually, we'll probably take a little bit less because we're running a little bit behind having started late. Take about 4 minutes. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk through some of these and I'll ask some of you to share your thoughts. Yeah? Anybody have any particular problems with regards to any of the things you're asked to do here? Everybody was able to identify a real-life policy issue? Anybody have any trouble with that? They'll come back to bite you. No?
Early stage research is difficult to kind of put into.
Absolutely. Early stage research can be very, very difficult. And in that case there, I suppose I'm wondering really, if you're at the early stage of your research and you're wondering what it is that you can do, what it is that might benefit, how might you find that out? How might you find that out? If you're at the early stage of your research and you're looking for a direction, I mean, one of the things that we would suggest is a public engagement. So if you're actually talking to the policy community that would be affected already, you can have an idea from them what their needs are. You can get them on side early so that they will help you shape your research. It may or may not be helpful depending on what you're doing, but it will certainly give you a direction if you're looking for a direction, and it can be a very valuable thing to do at an early stage of your research because you're setting up. You're getting yourself ready. You're already thinking about your policymaker and how you can make that impact later on. And you can actually get the kind of research, get the sort of work done that you need to put in a policy brief or something else to create your impact. Yeah? Anybody else have any comments or any issues or any problems?
No findings yet.
No findings yet. Yeah, well, you do need the findings, unfortunately. You know, and like I said, same thing. The sooner you start thinking about where you might go, if, you know, again, it depends a little bit your areas. I'm just thinking, it's education, is that correct? Yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, obviously, again, if you're talking to key groups of beneficiaries or public that your work might impact on, you might get some indication from them of where it's going. But yeah, no, you're right, this is a gap. You need to know later. Anybody?
I sort of feel a little bit caught between two stools. So the project I'm looking at is working with people like Public Health England, the STL, and they write their own policies for their own things, but then they obviously link in with other policymakers. So I'm wondering how and where to target. So I'm at that stage.
Well, we will come to that about who to target. Yeah, we will talk about who to target and how later. I mean, at this point here, if you've got them both identified, right? I mean, the way you would, I'm trying to remember, was somebody in their questionnaire asked a specific question about whether or not you structure things differently for different groups, a policy brief different for different groups. And the answer to that, slightly, I mean, I was going to tell you this at the end, but the answer to that is yes and no. I mean, the presentation might vary a little bit, but the content and what you actually have in there is a structure, and there is, you know, a cake can look of many different ways. It's still going to have flour and eggs usually, or some kind of, you know, it's got key ingredients. And it's the same thing with a policy brief. A good policy brief contains certain things, which we'll be coming to, whether or not you're doing it to whoever. Yes?
This is a good question right at the end here. You know, why do you think this has not happened?
Yes.
I'm a focus name. I'm thinking sensitivity bias.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting things I think, and I have no idea, so I'm hoping shed some light, but you know, the rhetoric of what they see as a wiki or a policy problem that they put out there as a policy issue that you might respond to. I mean, it's about how you establish how committed to the rhetoric are
Yeah.
actually doing it. So when you say, why do you think this
Yeah.
will not happen? So
Yeah.
in my particular case, they talk a lot about why the police do not reflect the communities
Sure.
they serve, and they worry about
Mhm.
recruitment. Actually, recruitment's the last thing. They actually
Yeah.
need to worry about the people that are inside already.
Yeah.
My research is right.
Yeah.
But then how do you, when you say, why do you think it's not happened? I suspect that they're not as committed as perhaps the
Mm.
rhetoric is.
Mm.
And then so, if that is right, is it worth doing?
Gosh. Well, kind of mammoth in many respects. That's a very particular case. And I think to try... Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, of course, we're always only dealing with humans, right? And humans have different priorities. And when I say yes, they want to know. I mean, it still comes down to this. What's in it for me, right? And somewhere, even when you're dealing with the police, and I've had dealings with police, that sounds awful, doesn't it? In my dealings with the police in the past, what I have found is that there are often one or two game changers, right? There are people who want to make the changes, who are committed to making changes, and there are a lot of people who push back. Your goal and your mission is to find those game changers, find those people who want to do it. And that's unfortunately what it comes down to. And sometimes you will hit brick walls because although the rhetoric, as you say, is very yeah, the reality is no. And if that's why it hasn't happened yet, kind of better you know it from early on that the reason why it's not happening is because actually there's no real will, which might have to do with budgets, might have to do with, employment practice, might have to do with all sorts. But, it's worthwhile knowing because then you know what you're in for as much as anything else. Okay, does somebody want to read theirs? Sorry?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay, go on. Mhm.
So, well, I can read like part of mine where I had my question in the sense that you ask here, what would you advise policymakers to do on the basis of your findings?
Mm-hmm.
So many times, like my research is dealing with deforestation. And many times we're facing very complex problems that are caused by just many different things. So I think a challenge in this type of policy briefs is which advice, how would you rank that advice and what would you include or not to policymakers? Because you can have several recommendations on what they can do because problems are so complex. I can think right now of just a list of maybe 10 things.
Okay.
I know they won't
Yeah.
do all those things. They won't have budget either to pursue all
Yeah.
those. So how do you do that?
Okay, now this is what is the overall impact then? What is the change, the overall change that you want to make? What will your research make better?
So, well, basically it's just aiming to reduce deforestation.
Sorry, aiming to reduce?
Deforestation.
Okay. You'll have to forgive me, I'm not hearing you well at all, but aiming to...
Sorry, I'm sick.
Actually, so am I. Sorry. Aiming to reduce...
I cannot breathe.
Deforestation.
Oh, deforestation. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes. Aiming to reduce deforestation. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Why? Okay. Well, for many reasons, it's like linked to driving climate change globally, reducing valuable resources like water for the entire world, just to name a few.
Okay. Okay, so your challenge here, right? So your overall impact that you want to achieve is aiming to reduce deforestation, right? Ways or paths to this, fighting climate change, if you basically, or saving water resources, is about environmental benefit, right? So in some respects, your aim is to, forgive my pedestrianness, because this is really, but you're aiming to benefit the environment, either globally or and through reducing deforestation, right? Now, deforestation. So if you're looking at that form then, you're saying, okay, so what would you advise policymakers to do? Well, in your executive summary, you can say there are two main inroads to doing this. They are, we can achieve this by fighting climate change and saving water resources, or the other way around. We can do this and do this by doing this. So you're structuring your argument, right? This will lead to this, your overall impact, right? And then, with regards to recommendations, or what you would advise policymakers to do, you want a couple of quick, short recommendations, right? So, I don't know what it would be. What is it, tax something maybe? Or what would you recommend? What do you think policymakers should do? What do they need to change? Are they going to, I don't know, put quotas? You know, sort of, that's what you need to come up with. Like I said before, you need to know what you're asking them for as much as anything else. So if you want a quota, you can say, well, you know, we're going to suggest you do these things by introducing a quota, or putting on a tax, or, I don't know, tree planting, or, you know, or anything, or whatever it is that you're recommending, or creating, you know, whatever. This is one of the areas where, if you are working with a policy group, they can tell you, you know, they can help you, they can help push you in a direction so that you can make a very firm, clear recommendation. Is that clear to people? Am I making sense, or am I just getting feverish? Yeah? Yeah, anybody else? I want you to hold on to, oh, I can see a hand.
Well, just
or pen.
thinking about the issue of timeliness and sort of saying the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
If you're in the US at the moment, for
Yeah.
example,
Yes.
trying to influence US policy, you've
Yes.
got another challenge in front of you. But
Yep.
just don't worry about the timeliness.
Yeah, and that again comes very much down to identifying allies and, you know, so who your change makers are and who it is. You know, a good policy brief will make you friends and will make you allies, right? And that's really ultimately how changes get made, is by finding somebody who will commit to it. You provide them with the, you know, you'll forgive the very, just because you said US, you provide them with the ammo, they hit the target, right? And yeah, there's absolutely, you know, timing is absolutely crucial. I mean, at the moment, I suspect that if you had research on, you know, sort of, well, you know, Donald Trump, I'm sure, is very interested in research on migrants and terrorism at the moment. So you've got that, and you can prove his, you know, he'll be lapping it up because he's not finding it elsewhere. But I digress. Okay, so hold on to those forms because we're going to be moving and using them again later. So you remember we already discussed some of the key attributes that you need for your policy brief a little bit earlier, given who policy makers are. So they need to be brief, well-structured, written in accessible, non-academic language, front-loaded. Remember, at the very top, you tell them what it is you want to do, and it needs to include your recommendations, really important. If you can't tell them what to do, they're not going to know. They will not work it out for themselves. You need to work it out for them, I'm afraid. It's a bit like having children. Show them how your proposal differs from current policy. If you're just recommending something they're already doing, you know, great, thank you. Thank you for the handshake and the vote of confidence, but, you know, you won't have made any impact. Include practical ideas on how to make it work. So if you're already working in some instances with, you know, the policy community, with groups of beneficiaries, with the public, you know, include that and use illustrations where useful. Now, what I'm going to do is, at this point here, is I am going to ask you to look at those two policy briefs that I handed out earlier. The breastfeeding policy brief and the second one, which was, where's my notes? I had 3 originally, I'm only giving you 2 though, which is, oh yes, the effect of metering on water consumption. Now these both came from the university here. I'm sorry, Giles, I didn't actually print the last page of the breastfeeding one. There's a lovely blue page, but my printer ink was running low, so you don't get the last blue page. Have a look at those briefs, and given these things here, I'd like you to evaluate them. How effective do you think these policy briefs are? You don't need to take very long, just about 5 minutes. By all means, discuss it amongst yourselves if you want. Again, just have a look. What works about them? What doesn't work about them? How do they measure up? If you were a policymaker, would you keep reading? With the breastfeeding, with Beyond Breast is Best policy brief, what did you think of it? How effective was it? How What do you think? Go on. Sorry, good? Did anybody think it wasn't good? Why don't we start there?
We said it was a good first draft.
Oh, interesting. Don't forget, she's thinking of introducing a module, don't forget. So anyway, but anyways. So first, okay, anybody else? Oh, actually, before we go on, why just good as a first draft? What was it lacking?
Well, I found it quite, there's quite a lot of text.
Mhm.
The key findings, I mean, that's research speak rather than policy speak, it seems
Uh-huh.
to me.
Mhm.
So maybe the word recommendations
Mhm.
were much shorter sentences in that box.
Yeah, yeah,
Because I can't, it's too much to read.
yeah,
It just was quite a lot of words.
yeah.
Know what Willard's reasoning
Jargon, interesting. Now, what's very interesting about that is I showed these both to some of my colleagues, and I think it's pretty good, actually, in many respects. It's really very strong. Interestingly enough, I wonder if I should say this or not, I understand from one of my colleagues, Christina, that the two academics who contributed to this actually attended one of these workshops. Hooray,
Yeah,
look, it worked.
When I first saw it, I
Yeah.
did think this is very good and a lovely example, but I
Yeah.
guess you've invited us to critique it. So
I have most definitely invited you to
that's
critique
what
it.
us researchers always do.
Yes, and that said, when I showed it to various people that I work with in various different areas, some people in the media, some people who work in health, as well as the chair of the charity where I work, who's in the House of Lords, and they all said that they actually thought maybe it was a bit wordy. I mean, again, being concise is to be aimed for.
I thought if they used the space better and they were more concise and cut out some of the repetition, they'd probably get it on one page.
Yes, possibly. Yeah.
For me,
Mhm.
one page is kind of categorically better than
Yeah, particularly, I think, again, this depends a little bit. Again, we're talking about style and strategy here. If it is the first time you're approaching somebody, there's a real benefit into only giving them one page to look at. Because as we said before, people are busy, they don't have very much time. What you do need to make sure is that you follow up on it, right? And if they are interested, you can provide them with more information, which I realize means that I am asking to do 2 policy briefs rather than 1. But sometimes, in fact, that is, in fact, what you want to do. You want to have something quite short and sharp to get them hooked, and then you can kind of, overwhelm them with your fantastic research and your findings and your brilliance and your insights on your second approach.
We feel that they've actually showed how the proposal differed from current policy unless you kind of really dug down into it and assumed it. And the other bit was the what's in it for me seemed to come a bit late, really. We thought perhaps it should be restructured so that the recommendations rather than findings came later,
Yeah.
more punchy.
Yep.
And then what's in it for me up front.
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. I mean, again, yeah, it depends. There is an element of sort of knowing who your audience is, and I don't know who this policy brief was directed at. Certainly, it would fit people who are already working in maternal services, pediatrics, rather than it would, for instance, be a good policy briefing for a journalist. Because, as you said, there's lots of stuff in there. You go, oh, well, it's reasoning, duty, distinction. Wait, what? But yeah. There's something else that I thought was missing, or it's there, but it's just really hard to see. Did anybody else notice the date is very tiny on that second page? Now, if you're getting 20 or 30 of these every week, and, let's face it, some people just go, and you don't know quickly, if you know that it's recent, it's how long is a piece of string? There are very many ways, but I'd be very tempted to make the date more prominent as well. I think the picture is quite good. And again, when I spoke to various people that I work with, the picture had both very positive and less positive. Some people say, well, you don't need a picture, it just makes it kind of, but I think it actually does stick in your memory. People will remember it in a way. And it's kind of a branding, if you want. If you used it on your second follow-up, it could be effective. But again, there are many different ways to do things. In terms of the other stuff, it is reasonably brief. It's reasonably well structured in that it has good, clear headings. So at least you know where it's going. Language, I'm telling you, I've read a lot worse. Language is quite good. And it is, with that executive summary at the top, front-loaded to a degree as well.
The
So.
title also draws you in a bit, because retrospective stuff kind of hints at what it's advanced
Yeah.
something, but it's
Yeah.
not a research type of.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, and I think particularly if sort of you're already working in this, for policymakers working in this area, for policy groups, they will recognise not only the breast is best, but it has meaning. There is a semantic to this already. Okay, how about the other one? How about the effect of metering on water consumption? What did you make of that one? That's I have to tell you, that's an older one.
Some time ago.
Quite some time ago, even. Oh. And
Not leading in any way.
so, what did you think of the second one then? The effect of metering on water consumption. Anything good or bad? How does it work, do you guys think? Any comments? Yes?
I think it's a good summary, but it's not written with a view of influencing policymakers. I mean, it's just a summary of piece of research.
It's a summary. I'm sorry, it's a summary of research. It's kind of interesting if you're interested in that. But if you're not, it doesn't really do the things, the recommendations. It doesn't tell you, I've erased our £100 million question, but it doesn't answer that question. What's in it? Why is anybody, what are they suggesting? Are they suggesting that everybody should have a water meter? Why? Exactly. I mean, I think that, I'm sorry to say that, there are a number of issues. I mean, the good things about this, it's quite brief, it fits onto two sides of A4. That's manageable if you're skimming or you're looking through. But otherwise, there's an awful lot here about methodology, which, to be perfectly blunt, your busy policymaker is less interested in. It is for aficionados, for your fellow researchers, for other academics, it's really, that's the meaty stuff. That's what you want to know. Policymakers aren't really interested in how you got there. They don't care which number of buses you took, whether or not you had to get a taxi, whether or not it was raining, whether or not there was, who else was at the bus stop. They just want to know that you got to the destination, right? And that is, I think, probably the biggest problem with this brief here, is that it's about the present. It is not about the future. And your policy briefs are always about the future. What could be? What are we aiming for? What's going to happen next? Right? Yeah, so that, I think, probably, does anybody else have any comments about that or any questions? If not, we're going to move along. Okay, so model structures. And if you look at the breastfeeding policy brief, it's basically laid out like this, right? Title, executive summary, it follows a certain pattern. Now, these are all the bits that I would suggest, or we would suggest, that you want to have in your policy brief. These are all the elements. Right? You can dress them however you want. You can put a picture, you can put illustrations, you can, you can use crazy fonts if you want. It's up to you. I'd only urge you to be consistent, and I suspect that there is already a house style.
There is indeed.
Yeah, yeah. So, but these are the things that I think that you really need to have in there. Now, okay, bearing those in mind, I'm going to hand out another exercise. Little bit of, now, honestly, this is not the worst executive summary I've ever read. But it's pretty close. I mean, it's not too difficult to do better. John Eager and Susan Newby. What I want you to do is read their little executive summary there and ask yourself, what's wrong with it? What could be done better? So, what's missing? What's wrong with this summary? Or what's right about it?
I think there are too many technical words.
Too much jargon, yeah?
Many details, like I don't think at the beginning you need to tell them that what she used or the theories you're writing. And it doesn't say why do I have to read this, like it's what's there and what's in it for me.
Yeah. Okay, so missing question. Anybody else?
The last sentence is quite useful.
Could you read out the last sentence?
The research has clear implications for the structure of regional pay for doctors and nurses. Start with that.
Yeah, but what's the implication? I mean, that's the key thing that's missing, isn't it? It has clear implications. Great.
And then they could say what they want.
Which would answer that question, wouldn't it? Was it, so what? Yeah, great. You know, do I just trust you? Do I just believe you? What? Yeah. Anything else? Anybody else got anything that they feel they want to share about this?
Seems to be a lot of methodological detail which was very pointless.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
the whole sentence is not the same.
Yeah. In your executive summary, you do not need methodology at all. You really don't. It does not belong there. They are not.
Academics rather than policy.
Exactly. Absolutely. And you're absolutely right there. It's written for the wrong person. Like I said, they're not interested in how you got to your destination. They just want to know that you got there and where you are, right? Anything else? Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of. I mean, it's just. Yeah. It's just a little bit esoteric in some respects, isn't it? Anything else missing? What about the language?
Well, the sentences are far too long.
Very long sentences. Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the jargon, but also, yeah, very long sentences. If you are skimming, you might be familiar with this when you skim yourself. People skim quickly. There's a reason why Twitter works quite well for sending a message, is because you have to be short and sharp. And I'm not saying that you should limit your executive summary to 140 characters, but short and sharp will stick. If somebody has to read a sentence twice, they may not, right? Yeah, so we did say this was more of a research summary than an executive summary for a policy brief. I mean, it's vague with regards to the recommendations. There's a hint of it. There's way too much detail on research. There's no context either. Why does this matter? I mean, we talked a little bit about that last sentence, the implications. But, you know, why does that matter? You know, so what? So there are implications. Well, what are they? But also, so what if there are implications? You know? Now, what about the title? Can I ask you to consider that? Policy brief. Colin, public sector pay. What do you think? Do you know from reading that title what this brief is about? Ideally, your title should give a strong indication of what it is that you are suggesting, what your recommendation is. Beyond breast is best, it's really the sub-bit there. That is, promoting and supporting breastfeeding while protecting formula feeders from guilt and shame. That's what this policy brief is about. You can read right away. You have a very clear indication of who the beneficiaries are, what the benefits are, and what the implications of this research are. Right? It's all there. I mean, you know, writing a good title is an art. But, you know, good title, they say picture is worth 1,000 words, good title also. Probably 2,000 words, even worth more. Yep, we're missing the context, clarity on recommendations. There's some cryptic detail in there, and I think we've more or less got it all there. Now, this is the fun part. If you would like, you could either, at this point, take your policy brief that you worked on before, your policy implications, and I will ask you to write an executive summary for your own research. Or, if you would like to, you can stay with John Eager and Susan Newby, and if you just flip open that package there, you will see that there's some information about what it is, in fact, that they do. Much more information that you have in that executive summary. So you can either, I'm going to ask you now to take 5, say, how much time do we have? Let's take about 10 minutes, actually. 10 to 15 minutes, I think we can do that. To write your own executive summary for your own policy, or to rewrite John and Susan's for them, using the information that you have there. What I'm going to do is we will, did I have that here? Yeah. Yeah, remember what we said about language? I did rather. I'm going to just put us back to this page here. So remember, these key bits, brief, well-structured, Written in an accessible language, yeah, that's probably your best one. And take about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll come back at about 20 past the hour, and then we will review what you have done. How did you get on? How did people feel that went? I have to say, it's a big ask in a short workshop. But how did it feel? Are you feeling like you're getting an idea of what direction? Everybody reasonably okay? If so, that would be good, because I'm going to ask somebody to read theirs out loud, please. A brave volunteer. Remembering that this is a big ask in a short workshop, and that there are many different ways to do it, would anybody like to put themselves forward to read their executive summary, either the John and Susan's research or of their own? This is actually also a really valuable time to find out from a group of very mixed colleagues whether or not what you're writing is making sense to Joe Average, or to, in this case, you can all be the policymakers. Will it work? Will the brief work? Who wants to have a go? Hooray, come on. Great, fantastic, please.
Okay, so title: Effective Psychological Services for Homeless People. The summary: the number of homeless people continues to rise, with nearly 4,000 people sleeping on the streets of England at the last count. Untreated mental health problems are significantly implicated for the cause of maintenance of sleeping. People who are homeless do not access health and mental health services in the way that they are currently provided, and current government policy does not make provision for these issues, focusing in the main on housing provision. Research at the University of Southampton indicates that specialist psychological services can effectively treat the problem underpinning the behaviours which lead to repeated tenancy breakdown. These may be in the form of individual therapeutic interventions provided in the context of psychologically informed environments. It's essential that practitioners trained in psychological therapies provide ongoing support for these individuals.
What do you think? People? Any comments? Okay.
I want them to change policy so that they start putting some resources into specialist psychological services in the built environment and on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Taking the focus slightly off housing things.
Or actually building it into current housing policy so you can support housing policy psychologically.
So that would come in the recommendation bit.
Yeah, well, at the risk of getting it wrong, and do forgive me if I do get it wrong, I think it was, I have to say, I think it was really good. Really good. But, if you wanted to, lots of different ways to skin a cat. I mean, you could say, if policy was changed so that we introduced this into this, this is what would happen. Just as clear and as straightforward and as blunt as that. Do this, this will happen. One short, sharp sentence. It will make them sit up and look. Possibly the research bit was tiny, a little bit long for what you had there. It was 2 sentences, kind of, possibly. I'd have to look at it. It's hard doing it verbally. Would you remind me, what was your title again?
Effective Psychological Services for Homeless People.
Yeah, I think that maybe, see, what your title doesn't do, I mean, it's very clear, but creating effective, just even by putting that active verb in your title is a clear indication of what the action needs to be done, right? So it's creating, and that active verb could work. Anybody else have any other comments? I did think it was really, really strong. I think it was great. You can go home now. Great. Anybody else? Come on. Wait, let's get a really bad one. No. Come on. Somebody, come on. Somebody should be brave and put themselves forward. We should do a few of them. We're all friends. All feedback will be constructive. Let's go. Oh.
Self-regulated learning for a better academic life and beyond. Recently, research findings indicate the benefits of implementing self-regulated learning strategies before starting academic measures in higher education. Currently, promotion of self-learning strategies are taken for granted in the foundation programs in colleges of applied sciences. However, percentage of students failing academic studies or dropping out of college indicates otherwise. Implementing self-regulated learning in foundation programs is likely to prepare students for academic studies and save teachers time and students disappointment.
Again, not bad at all. Anybody have any comments? Okay, remind us of your title again.
Self-regulated learning for a better academic life and beyond.
I quite like the title myself because it's a pointer as to what this policy brief will change, which is quite effective in that respect. I suppose I wonder a little bit whether or not you started with your research findings, right? Research findings.
Not my findings.
Or the findings. Yeah.
Findings.
Oh, I see. I would avoid using research findings to begin with, or research has found, just because you're the researcher, right? It's a little bit kind of, I found it a little bit confusing. Maybe other people wouldn't, but I found it a little bit confusing hearing. I thought, oh, so your research is doing that. State the situation. You don't need to say research is found, or you can just say whatever. Take out the research is found and just state it as a fact. Be bold, rather than saying I talked to 10 people, or surveys have found that people like chocolate cake better than vanilla cake. People like chocolate cake more than vanilla cake. Just be blunt. Go straight to the point. It'll help you keep your word count down. It will help you keep your sentences shorter. You don't need to apologize or set it up. That comes later. Anybody else? Yeah. And that would also allow you, I think, to get kind of straight to the point of spelling out what the problem is. The problem is this. People like chocolate cake, more people should eat vanilla cake. Or vanilla cake makers are going out of business. Whatever, make it short and sweet. Okay, can we have another example from somebody? Or what do you think? I can see you think, what do you think? Yes, works or not? Doesn't work? There's criticisms? Do you think that works, or is that making sense?
Yes, it does. But I started with that because I don't have findings.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Of course. I forgot about your lack of findings. Okay. Anybody else?
I thought it was quite good in that it felt like you were providing the policy person with the selling points.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, and I'm sorry, I didn't say. You did very well. The what's in it for me? The key question. Mm-hmm. Okay, come on. We should do at least one more. Hopefully two. Well, please.
The title is Placing the Focus on Quality through Establishing Conducive Team Environments. The findings of this research line up with international research findings, which indicate that teams function effectively as their tenures get longer. Outsourcing recruitment, the longer team members spend together, the better relations are established, which eases team leadership and establishing basis for enhanced performance. Outsourcing recruitment through one-year contracts reverses that effect in the English language departments, which calls for stabilizing the English language department teams through stopping outsourced recruitment and providing better orientation programs.
Okay. Comments? Remind us again of your title.
Placing the focus on quality through establishing conducive team environments.
What do you think? I'm wondering if it's a little long. And I'm also wondering if it's a little bit daunting for the non-academic skim reader. It sounds heavy, deep. I'm not really sure exactly what it's about. And that might be because I don't know your research area, granted, but it's a bit, I'm finding it hard to get my head around, to wrap my head around. If I spend too long thinking about your title, I probably won't go any further. Do you know what I mean? Anybody got any comments? How can we shorten that, do you think? Having heard what she said, is there any way that we could shorten that? Because it was about...
I think we could have started with the teams work best when they...
Yeah.
There was 2 sentences in the beginning that maybe didn't have...
Yeah. I would slightly be... the sentence that you had at the end about outsourcing, etc., if you move that to the top right away, right, this is what we're proposing, or this is what we think. If you outsource or do this, this will happen. X will lead to Y will lead to Z. right? So again, right at the very top, and then do your other bits. But, sort of, yeah? So shorter title, that one sentence, or that, outsourcing will do, or whatever at the end, you might even want to try and integrate it into your title. If you can integrate it into your title, then you've part of your job is done. Because your title leads you clearly to exactly the impact or the change or the policy that you want to change. That's something that we found slightly differently when we were actually writing the impact case studies during the last REF. One of the things that we found was very useful is that if we had a really good title, because I don't know how many of you were involved in the last REF, it was very strict with regards to the word counts in every single section, and they were incredibly inhibiting and quite difficult even for seasoned writers, people who do this professionally. But if you had a title that more or less summed up what your first sentence might say, you saved yourself that word count, that time, because your title already pointed the reader in this case, the people who were doing the assessments, in the direction of what it was that your research did, what was the impact that it created. Same thing with this. If you look at a newspaper, headlines often point you at exactly what's going to be in there, right? Okay, shall we do one more? Quickly, a quick one. See, this is a really quick one, so we'll just, okay, let's go.
Title is Quality Assurance Practices in Universities Offering Open and Distance Learning in Zambia. There are serious concerns over the low quality of programs which universities are offering through open and distance learning in Zambia. It is also not clear what quality systems universities have put in place to deliver their programs. For a long time, universities were mandated to self-regulate themselves. However, the current policy compels all higher education providers to institutionalize national policies at local level. There is need to monitor and regulate the actual quality assurance provisions in universities through quality audits. There's also need to strengthen the quality assurance framework that specifically addresses the unique points which open and distance learning presents. Additionally, design a model for quality assurance which is country specific.
What do people think? Any comments? Again, I don't think there was a bad effort at all. I think one of the things that occurs to me is you spent a lot of time getting to where you wanted to get. I mean, if your first sentence was, universities regulating themselves has resulted in this problem, and then lay out your problem, X, Y, Z, right? I think that was probably about 3 sentences in, but you get there right away in a very quick, sharp thing. If people recognize that problem, they go, yeah, you're right. That is a problem, and then they keep reading. If you only get there by the 3rd sentence, you don't need to give so much context. You have to, again, you're aiming probably 150, 200 words. It's really not very much at all, but short, sweet, and sharp will make an impact. No pun intended. So I would be tempted to do that. Again, also with your title, I think it's hard, isn't it? It's really hard because you want to put all that information in, like we were talking before, but you also want to make it grabby. So if it's too long, again, if you have to read the title a few times, it's not working. How to Win Friends and Influence People. I have no idea what's in that book. Has anybody ever read that book? Everybody knows the title though, because it's so sharp and sweet, right? It says absolutely, if you want to win friends and influence people and you actually believe that the author might be able to help you, then you would read it. But it's grabby. It is an art, learning to write a title, learning to write a headline. But with practice, it will come. Get people to help you. I mean, that title writing particularly is a really good way where you can get colleagues and friends or family even to give you a hand. What do you think? Sounds catchy or not? Well, if they're like my family, they'll be particularly blunt. Okay. Any questions there? We're going to start moving quite quickly at this point because we are getting on. We're supposed to wrap up on the hour. So once you have your policy brief, what do you do with it? Well, you are quite lucky here because the university actually has, I was going to say, Christina found photos of you. But you have a team here who can help you direct your policy brief to the right people. Now, they're obviously very useful and very dedicated and really good at what they do. But you are also very good at what you do. And very often, because your research, depending on what it is, brings you into contact with key stakeholders, whether they be members of the community that are affected or other people who might benefit, pressure groups or charities, the things that we were talking about before. Because you will know who they are, right? You can also play a key role in getting those policy briefs to the right people. If it's new and fresh, there's nothing wrong with carrying it around with you and just handing it over when you meet people, either at conferences. I don't know how often you guys get to go to conferences, but, think conferences, other kind of professional, hand it out, spread it around, right? Okay, so you have that, and we're going to just whiz through this bit here. So, also, you can always take it to your MP's surgery. Now, this obviously depends on who your MP is and what your research is and whether or not they're even remotely interested. We talked about SPAD, special advisors, before. There are, obviously, you all work in quite different areas. There will be ministers in particular who might be interested in what you're doing specifically. Find out who they are, send it to them. Unfortunately, we can't tell you because it's all very individual. It's like matchmaking. So,
But we can.
Aha.
So when it comes to stakeholder analysis in particular, have a look at the public policy website and get in contact with us, and we can start to draw up particular ministers or pressure groups and other organisations and take some of the strain out of the process.
It's quite. I have to say, this is quite rare. Not. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There are lots of universities now who have. Areas that deal with impact particularly, but not in such a specialised way as this. So you're very lucky there. But again, it really depends. It might be a local councillor who's going to be more, depending on what your area is or not. There are obviously various established routes by which to get your research into Parliament or what have you. Any of these different committees or all-party parliamentary groups. Again, some of you, that's more relevant to some of you than others, thinking about it. Actually, deforestation would be quite a good one. But yeah, there are various areas. They're all hungry for information. You send them, your material is well presented, they will pay attention. They need you. They really seriously do need you. In the same way that the media needs you. Journalists are always looking for a good story. If there's, like we talked about Trump earlier, right? If there's something current that's happening, that's been in the press, that is linked to or runs parallel to, or that your research can provide a different insight or something on. I mean, Turkey, well, you could go forever, couldn't you? But, again, journalists, make friends with a journalist. Send them a policy brief, ask them if they want to know more. Volunteer. If you already do media engagement, do some more. Volunteer to do more. You can, ideally, if you can hand over your policy brief in person, that's the best way to do it. People tend to remember it. If you're going to send it by email, do put it in the body of the email as well as an attachment. People often don't open attachments, I'm sorry to say. That's part about being busy and skimming and also having the right software. Yeah. And don't just send an email with the policy brief attached to it. You'd be amazed at how many people do that. And, those are the ones that get ignored very quickly. Now, this is key. So, you've pressed the flesh, you've handed over your policy brief and all the rest of it. How are you going to make sure that your contribution, the research you've done, the impact you've made is acknowledged? Anybody? How are you going to make sure? The answer's on the board. Just ask. It's incredible. Again, we talked about how people are busy. People will often be so busy that they will forget to say thank you. They don't only forget to say thank you, they forget to give you credit. So from the outset, if you can, at some point, just say, look, if there's a white paper, if there's a green paper, if you use this research, could you please credit us? Ideally, if it's a white paper or green paper, there's a whole area for sources, right? If you've got an MP, and this has happened so many times, this is so annoying. Part of the research we do on broadcasting has been read out in the House of Lords. Blasted bishops never credited us at all, you know. And it's really, you can go through Hansard and you can read literally things that I've written, and they haven't credited us. So what do you do in that instance? You send them a very nice letter. You say, thank you so much. It's really, I'm really glad to see that it was useful for you, and I hope that, you know, we have more. We will send you more. Would you mind for our own records, because being a charity, we need to prove impact as well, to the Charity Commission. Would you mind writing a letter, you know, citing how many times we met? And I'll even draft it for them sometimes. We met on these occasions, this is the research that was presented, and this is how we used it. Even just a letter. Email's fine, right? Email's fine too. Once you get it, what you really need to remember is not to lose it. Because again, you'd be amazed at how many people, during the last ref, there was a lovely man, not from this university, I hasten to add, but who had, I mean, up in Scotland, had done these incredible things in the run-up to the referendum. Really interesting research that really impacted on how, you know, sort of the SNP kind of, you know, put together their campaign and the rest of it. Lots of great letters from Alex Salmond. He lost them. He had them all in a sort of remote storagey something or another that, you know, got destroyed in some kind of, it was a flood or something like that, and it was gone. Once you get the information, keep it safe, because when it comes to doing your ref, and do it right away too, that's the other thing, do it as soon as you can, because when it comes to doing your impact case study later, or your ref or what have you, even when it comes to looking back on your own records and who you've already spoken to, because if you talk to a lot of people, it's very easy to talk to them again and forget what you've told them. Keep a record. It's laborious to a degree, but that kind of housekeeping from the beginning will save you a lot of headaches later on. It's like doing your taxes early. Okay, now, once you've done that, so you've reached your policymaker, they love you, you're having regular chats, they call you up and they ask about your kids and your pets. After that, really, we did this bit here already, what you want to do is you want to capitalize on that success, right? So what can you do? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Heck, talk to an opposition MP. Talk to somebody else who's also in. Talk to the policymakers. Don't just use one route. The more routes you use to get into a door, or sorry, into a room, the more doors that you have, the more the likelihood that you will find one open and ready. And also, the other thing is that there's this thing that happens in, I do a lot of radio production, and we are incredibly parasitic. We basically feed off each other. There is a reason why you hear the same people on Radio 4 all the time. And that's because we all listen to what each other is saying, right? And we all pick up, oh, hey, they were pretty good. That was quite interesting. I'm doing a different program. I'm going to get that person too. The same thing happens among policymakers, right? If policymakers are using your research, they are pulling that stuff in, and they hear that, oh, that other person made a really good point, and they've mentioned that they will, it's an awful thing. They take you more seriously. You are more likely to be invited back by more and more people. It's that kind of exponential growth of your reach. Okay, so now, are there any other questions? Because really, this is over to you now. We've kind of, I erased them, the things that you wanted to get into today's session.